Well, let's take a step back here, because the war for talent is high, as the article in the Fin Week this week has has suggested, and it's high on the priority list for business leaders. Where you don't have the muscle of a strong balance sheet to actually pull employees and talent your way. How strong a pull factor is company culture?
Well, I think company culture is aligning with what's happening in the world, where even consumers are not only shopping in places just because a product is good. So just like we have product parity, we have employer parity, where there are so many places to go and work, especially if you're a really qualified person. And the culture is really the foundation and the core of it all, where more and more younger people especially, they are looking for so much more than the job and the outputs and the measurables and all of those things.
Like what?
So what people are looking for is a place where they can fulfill their own purpose. There has to be a marriage between what the company needs and what it can provide for people. There has to be something that is meaningful to individuals. And what we are finding more and more is that personal values are aligning to company values. So I will seek an employer where the values are aligned to mine. So for example, if we look at Virgin Airlines, which is lively and mad and crazy, it will attract certain employees. But the culture is even more powerful than strategy. I was reading an article online the other day where it says, culture will eat strategy for lunch. And it's very true, because it's more and more through humans and through their beliefs in what you're trying to accomplish that you can achieve your strategy. And too many leaders are still neglecting it. They believe that culture sits on the one side and business sits on the other. And it's definitely an integrated process.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important point, is the whole cultural eat strategy thing. I think, we've lived in an environment for the last couple of years where companies, typical corporates have cut themselves quite aggressively. They've cut their workforce. There's a lot of distrust as an employee of a company that employs you. You're saying, well, we've gone through a round of retrenchments. Am I going to be on the next round? Maybe on the financial services sector, and you start distrusting the company you work for, which means you're not going to work harder, you're not going to work longer, because you really feel like it's a mercenary situation. I mean, I think it's very interesting. There was a stat here from the Forbes to their best 100 list, and the top 100 companies there. Actually, if you look at them over an extended period of time, I think the things run over 25 years. The top performers aggregate outperform the industry by 300%. So I mean, you do get this point that culture does eat strategy in a lot of ways, because people buy into a long-term strategy. And I think it's important for businesses also just to look at it and say, like, what am I trying to do here? I mean, it's an interesting mix, because you don't want to be having the employees having everything and the employer simply pandering to their needs. So I think it is quite an interesting trade-off there.
There definitely is a strong business case for putting a focus on company culture, but I think what many business leaders don't realize is that it's quite simple. It takes only a few practical steps each month to develop a strong and distinctive company culture. So I'd just like to ask Grace, what are some of the steps companies can take to develop that culture?
Well, remember, culture does exist. So sometimes the culture that exists is a culture that's not serving you well. So in order to create a culture that will serve you well, people have to be deliberate. And it was very interesting that what you were saying, Mark, around it's not only about the employee, and there's a very huge misconception that culture is about, Mother Teresa stuff. Oh, we're going to give our staff this and give them that, and that's not what culture is. You have to deliberately decide that if I'm going to promise this to my consumer, what do I have to design internally? And culture is it's a two-way street. It's about, I want a culture that breeds accountability, that breeds sharing or fairness, or I want a culture, if I'm a financial company, that where people are obsessed with accuracy. And it certainly isn't about culture in the olden days, where I remember I used to get called in and we want all our staff to be happy. It's shifting towards creating meaning, shared purpose, outcomes, and deliberate drive.
Yeah.
And I can probably jump in there because I think I can use two examples of the media industry where it's very obvious. And I think we all know. Let's use City Press as an example.
Yeah.
I mean, what Ferrell's done with that team, when you look at, I understand I'm punting an in-house title here, but we can look at Mail and Guardian as well. But what both Ferrell and Nick Dawes have done is they've created this culture of investigative journalism. And when you go there with the intention of being a crack journalist. You're going to break stories. And I think culture feeds on itself like that because these guys are going out there and they're building. You're going there with the aspiration to it. I know an intern who refused to take a job anywhere else until a gap opened up at Mail and Guardian. And I think you see the same thing, Google or General Electric. There are certain jobs that you want. And
they're just aspirational.
They're aspirational. And you're happy to get in at the lowest level. And I think that that's where culture is a very interesting aspect to try and control, because I think it ebbs and flows, but you want to be going through the situation where you want to be the aspirational destination for employees.
Well, Jessica said something very interesting earlier. You know, you said it's something simple to put in place, but sometimes that simplicity could be a hurdle and a very big challenge in itself. I mean, surely you find that some businesses are under the illusion that they're actually creating and fostering this great corporate culture. But perception is very different depending on where you're sitting in the organization, whether you're at top management level or lower down the ranks.
Well, you see, what happens sometimes is that leaders think that they can outsource culture to a consultant or the HR department or to some big agency, and we can have roadshows and serve sausage rolls and do presentations. The thing that makes culture difficult to deliberately design is that it is about the leadership, and it's about being very selective about our language. So the companies that understand that, it's easy, as you said, then it is easy, because then you work as an executive team to speak one language and to behave in a certain way. It becomes difficult when the belief in the benefit of a strong culture is not that high, when it's just because I read an article in Forbes, oh, well, we better have a nice culture, yes, let's call the HR department.
Yes, I think leadership is where it starts. So there's so many examples of that out there. You can look at Apple under Steve Jobs. The company was really edgy, aggressive, arrogant sometimes. And locally, an interesting comment came out of the CEO of Ocean Basket, Manny Nikos, and he mentioned that schizophrenic cultures, where the culture, where how you treat each other is different to the way you treat your customers, that no longer has longevity in today's world. And we're seeing that kind of thing being exposed more and more, where you treat your customers one way and your staff another way, and people pick up on that.
I mean, it was actually quite a cool article last week in the Harvard Business Review, and it was about bringing basic common courtesy back into business. Because I think, one, we all know about how you can copy and paste everything into an email, and you can go forth and your instructions will be followed, and it's, you know, there's very much a courtesy is one of those things that has disappeared out of business, and I think that a lot of it has to do with just the stress levels that a lot of people are under. But part of a culture is you don't want to be seen to be sucking up to your client all the time, and you're treating your staff internally at the completely other side of the spectrum. So I think that it is quite you've got stakeholders. I think you've got to view it as stakeholders. Everybody contributes, and when you've got courtesy towards your people inside, they have courtesy to the people outside.
Absolutely. Something I picked up on from the article is the good news for SMEs and entrepreneurs is that they have a unique opportunity to actually start and foster this culture from scratch. Arguably a far easier task than trying to change a toxic culture in an already established organization. Just how tough a feat is it turning things around?
It doesn't have to be tough if the top leader decides that it's going to be done. So it's just like anything. If you're trying to change your bottom line around or to change your product strategy, it's not tough if you decide you're going to do it, because then all that starts to happen is you start to behave in a way that is different, and people will naturally connect to it, because we are intuitive people, we're human. So very often, if the top leader is committed to it, there will always be a few who will find it difficult, but they'll follow or they'll go, and that's cool.
You know, I asked the question because we always talk about mindsets being one of the hardest things to change, and you know, this goes hand in hand. A mindset change.
It is mindset.
Perfect. Let's go through, you know, how we can actually work moving forward. I mean, you say leaders need to take that step, need to take the approach. So the leader takes the approach. How does that then start to, is it just a matter of engaging more? Is it as simple as that? Surely
Yeah.
It isn't.
I think over the last, well, I've been doing this for about 15 years now. There have been so many different trends, and we went through a whole trend in the 90s where there was a big boom and we all had lots of money, where the way that culture was marketed internally was very much in a very big, deliberate way, drumming, rah-rah, things like that. And we're moving towards an age now where it's part of how we are. So even the days of printing the posters that say our values. I was reading the Enron story a few weeks ago, and one of their values was credibility and honesty. And we don't have to say anything more about Enron. And I would be very curious to read what Kodak used to say about their culture and their values, because they probably didn't have an inherent culture of questioning and debating, because if they did, they'd probably still be here today. So my belief is that the way that you change and shift your culture in your organization is in a very sincere, intimate way, and it's got to become part of work. Yes, you can have separate interactive sessions. Of course, you can have discussions, but it's got to become part of the way you do work.